I live in a 3-bedroom house that I designed, saved for, and built in a quiet suburb, a testament to a decade of relentless hard work in my engineering career. For the first year, it was my sanctuary, a place of peace filled with books, blueprints, and the quiet hum of my own life. That all changed when I opened my door to my family, thinking I was offering them a temporary safe harbor, only to find out they saw me as a permanent convenience and, worst of all, a freeloader in my own home. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The phone call that started it all came on a rainy Tuesday evening. I was curled up on my sofa, reviewing structural plans for a new community center, a project I was incredibly proud of. The caller ID flashed Mom, and I smiled, picking up. That smile didn't last long. My mother, Karen, was hysterical. Through her sobs, she pieced together a story of financial ruin. My father, Mark, a construction foreman for over 40 years, had been laid off. His company was downsizing, and his age and salary made him an easy target. His pension wasn't what they'd expected, their savings were depleted from a few bad investments, and they were behind on their mortgage for the home I grew up in. The bank was threatening foreclosure. "We have nowhere to go, Livia," she cried, her voice cracking with a desperation I'd never heard before. Nowhere. My heart sank. Despite our complicated history, the thought of my parents being homeless was unbearable. My father was a proud, often stubborn man. For him to be in this position must have been crushing. My mother, who had always been the worrier, sounded completely broken. I had the space. The 2 guest bedrooms on the second floor were empty, collecting dust. It seemed like the only logical, compassionate thing to do. "You can stay with me," I said, the words leaving my mouth before I had fully processed their weight. "Stay here until you get back on your feet." The relief in her voice was palpable, a wave of gratitude that momentarily washed away my apprehension. My apprehension, however, was rooted in experience. My relationship with my parents had always been strained. I was the responsible one, the serious child who chose calculus over parties. My younger sister, Jessica, was the star. She was bubbly, beautiful, and effortlessly charming. My parents adored her. While I was studying for my engineering exams, they were funding her attempts to become a social media influencer. While I was saving for a down payment, they were helping her lease a flashy car to maintain her image. Jessica was part of the package deal, of course. She still lived at home, at 27 years old, contributing nothing to their household expenses. So when I offered my parents a place to stay, I knew it meant my sister was coming, too. A week later, a moving truck pulled up to my curb. It wasn't the small truck I expected for a few essential items. It was a full-sized rig, and they brought everything: bulky furniture that didn't fit my home's minimalist aesthetic, boxes of knickknacks, and a palpable sense of entitlement. My father immediately started critiquing the house I'd built. "The archway in the living room is off-center," he declared, squinting. "And these countertops? You should have gone with granite, not quartz. Quartz stains." I bit my tongue. "It's a composite quartz, Dad. It's actually more durable." He just grunted, as if my professional knowledge as an engineer was irrelevant compared to his foreman experience. My mother began trying to rearrange my kitchen, moving my utensils and appliances to places she deemed more sensible. Jessica claimed the larger of the 2 guest rooms, the one with the ensuite bathroom, and immediately began complaining about the Wi-Fi signal. I tried to be patient. I told myself this was a huge adjustment for them. They had lost their home, their pride. They were grieving. So I set some simple, gentle ground rules. "I just ask that you clean up after yourselves, help with groceries when you can, and respect my space and privacy," I said during a family meeting I'd called a few days in. "My office is off limits, please. That's where I work from home." They all nodded, my mother even patting my hand and saying, "Of course, dear." We wouldn't dream of being a burden. The first month was deceptively calm. I worked long hours, and they were mostly preoccupied with settling in. I would come home to the smell of my mom's cooking, a nostalgic comfort that made me believe this could work. My dad tinkered with things around the house, fixing a leaky faucet and patching a small hole in the drywall, which I appreciated. Jessica was mostly in her room, presumably creating content. I paid for all the groceries, covered all the utilities, and never once asked for a cent. I was happy to do it. This was my family, and I was in a position to help. My heart felt heavy with the responsibility, but it was a good kind of heavy. It felt like I was finally repaying them for the years they had raised me, proving that their investment in my education had paid off. I even sat down with them to discuss a financial plan. I offered to help my dad update his resume and look for consulting work. I suggested my mom could take a part-time job, something low-stress. I even offered to teach Jessica how to monetize her social media channels more effectively. They listened, nodded, and said they'd look into it. But they never did. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into a second month. My father's job search consisted of him scrolling through job boards for 10 minutes before declaring there was nothing out there for a man my age. My mother spent her days watching television, and Jessica's influencer career seemed to involve taking hundreds of selfies in my backyard and complaining that the lighting wasn't as good as at their old house. The heavy feeling in my heart started to change. It was no longer the weight of noble responsibility. It was the crushing weight of being taken for granted. The initial gratitude they had shown was gone, replaced by an unspoken expectation. This wasn't a temporary shelter anymore. In their minds, they had moved in. I had simply been the means to an end. My sanctuary was becoming a cage, and I was the one who had willingly handed them the key. The transition from grateful guests to entitled tenants was gradual, a slow erosion of boundaries that I barely noticed until I was ankle-deep in resentment. The simple house rules I had laid out were not just ignored, they were treated as mere suggestions from a silly child who didn't know better. My home, the one place on earth where I was supposed to have complete control, no longer felt like mine. It started in the kitchen. I am meticulous about cleanliness. It's part of the precision-oriented mindset that makes me a good engineer. I like clear counters, a clean sink, and everything in its proper place. My mother, however, operated in a state of what she called organized chaos. Dirty dishes would sit in the sink for days, justified with, "I'll get to them, Livia, don't fuss." The counters were perpetually cluttered with her mail, magazines, and half-empty cups of tea. When I tried to clean up, she would get offended. I was going to do that. You don't have to follow me around like I'm a child. My father, Mark, established his domain in the living room. My large, comfortable sofa was now permanently indented with his shape. He would watch TV at a deafening volume from morning until late at night, a constant barrage of old westerns and loud political news channels. He'd leave his shoes in the middle of the floor, his snack wrappers stuffed into the couch cushions, and his beer bottles on the end tables. When I asked him to please use a coaster on the wooden tables I had spent a fortune on, he scoffed. It's just a bit of water, for crying out loud. A house is meant to be lived in, not kept like a museum. My workspace, the office I had explicitly declared off-limits, became a battleground. I would be in the middle of a video conference, and Jessica would barge in without knocking, needing to borrow my high-speed scanner for her business. One afternoon, I came back to my desk after a lunch break to find my dad using my work computer. He had closed all my critical programs, CAD software, project timelines, structural analysis models, to look up prices for fishing gear. "Dad. What are you doing?" I exclaimed, my voice sharper than I intended. "This is a company laptop." All my work was open. He leaned back in my expensive ergonomic chair, unfazed. "Relax. I didn't break anything. You kids are so dramatic about your little computer jobs." The condescension in his voice was infuriating. He had no concept of the complexity or importance of my work. To him, if it didn't involve calloused hands and sawdust, it wasn't real work. The utilities, all under my name and paid from my bank account, were another source of conflict. The electricity bill tripled. They left lights on in every room, ran the air conditioning at Arctic temperatures, and took hour-long showers. My sister would do multiple loads of laundry a day, often with only 2 or 3 items in each. When I tried to have a conversation about conserving energy, my mother looked at me with wounded eyes. "Are you saying we're a burden, Livia? We're just trying to be comfortable." It was a masterful manipulation, turning my reasonable request into an accusation. They constantly positioned me as the cold, ungrateful daughter who was counting every penny. They conveniently forgot that I was the one paying every single penny. The grocery situation was perhaps the most blatant example of their disregard. I would do a massive shopping trip every weekend, filling the fridge and pantry with food to feed 4 adults. I bought the brands they liked, the snacks Jessica craved, the specific coffee my dad drank. Within days, it would all be gone. Yet, I would often find expensive takeout containers in the trash. They were using the money they supposedly didn't have to order food, while I was footing the bill for all the household staples. One evening, I decided to cook a special meal. I'd had a successful project milestone and wanted to celebrate. I bought fresh salmon, asparagus, and a nice bottle of wine. I came home from work looking forward to a pleasant evening, only to find my dad and Jessica eating pizza on the sofa in front of the TV. My salmon was still in the fridge, untouched. "Oh, we didn't know you were making that," my mom said from the kitchen, where she was wiping down a counter. Mark had a craving for pizza. "I sent a text to the family group chat this morning," I said, trying to keep my voice even. Jessica looked up from her phone, mid-chew. "Oh, yeah, I saw that. I just wasn't really in the mood for fish." There was no apology. No consideration for the effort or expense I had gone to. My plans, my desires, my contributions were secondary. The rules of my house didn't apply to them because, in their eyes, it wasn't truly my house. It was a family resource they were entitled to. I was just the caretaker, the person who kept the lights on and the fridge full. I went to bed that night not having eaten, the beautiful piece of salmon a symbol of my wasted efforts. I cried quietly into my pillow, mourning the loss of my home and the dawning, painful realization that the people I loved most were incapable of respecting me. The silence from their rooms was the loudest sound in the house, a testament to their complete and utter indifference. The breaking point didn't come from a loud argument or a dramatic confrontation. It arrived silently, in a series of whispers I was never meant to hear. It was a Saturday, about 4 months into their stay. I had woken up early with a migraine, a frequent and unwelcome visitor since my family had moved in. I took some medication and went back to bed, hoping to sleep it off. I must have drifted off, because when I woke again, it was late morning. The house was quiet, and I assumed I was alone. I tiptoed downstairs to get a glass of water, my head still throbbing. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I heard voices coming from the back patio. It was my parents and Jessica. They must have thought I was still asleep or had gone out. I paused, hidden from view by the wall separating the living room from the dining area. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, not at first. But then I heard my name, and I froze. "She's getting so uptight," Jessica was saying, her voice dripping with annoyance. She left another note on the fridge about turning off the lights. "It's so passive-aggressive." "She can afford it," my father's gruff voice cut in. "She makes all that money with her fancy engineering job. What's a few dollars for an electricity bill? It's the least she can do." The least I could do? I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. I was paying their way entirely. I had saved them from foreclosure. What more did they expect? Then, my mother's voice, the one that always tried to sound reasonable but was laced with venom, sealed my fate. "You know, Mark is right. She's lucky we're here." This big house, all by herself? It's pathetic. We're giving her a family, a real home. I had to put a hand over my mouth to stifle a gasp. Pathetic? They thought I was pathetic? Jessica laughed, a short, sharp sound. Seriously. And she's acting like we're the freeloaders. She has no idea. My dad chuckled. She's the perfect freeloader, actually. She pays for everything. It's the best deal we could have ever gotten. Way better than that tiny apartment we were looking at. Plus, once we get a bit of money saved up from not paying any bills, we can help you with a down payment on a condo, Jessie. A real investment, not like this place. The world tilted on its axis. My ears were ringing. This wasn't a temporary arrangement. This was a long-term strategy. They weren't trying to get back on their feet. They were using my home as a free hotel to save money for my sister. My act of kindness, my sacrifice, was nothing but a financial opportunity for them. They weren't living with me, they were living off of me. The final blow came from my mother. We just have to handle her carefully, Karen said in a low, conspiratorial tone. Keep her feeling like she's the good daughter, the responsible one. That's her weakness. She's so desperate for our approval, she'll do anything. As long as we keep her thinking she's in charge, we can stay here for at least another year. Maybe 2. I couldn't hear any more. I backed away from the doorway, my movements slow and robotic. I felt hollowed out, as if my entire insides had been scooped out, leaving nothing but a fragile shell. I crept back up the stairs, my migraine forgotten, replaced by a pain so profound it was physical. I locked myself in my bedroom, sank to the floor, and the sobs I had been holding back finally broke free. They were silent, racking sobs that tore through my body. Every memory of my perceived kindness felt like a new betrayal. Every meal I had cooked, every bill I had paid, every time I had bitten my tongue to keep the peace, it was all a sham. I wasn't their daughter, I was their mark. I was the freeloader who was funding their lives and my sister's future, all while being called pathetic behind my back. The title they had secretly given me was the most painful irony of all. In their twisted narrative, I, the homeowner, the provider, the sole financial contributor, was the one getting a free ride. I was freeloading on the family atmosphere they so generously provided. Lying on my bedroom floor, with the muffled sounds of their laughter drifting up from the patio, I felt something shift inside me. The deep, aching sadness began to crystallize. It hardened into something cold, sharp, and clear, anger. A pure, undiluted rage that burned away my tears. They had miscalculated. They thought my weakness was a desperate need for their approval. But they were wrong. My greatest strength was the very responsibility they were exploiting. And I would use that strength, not to serve them, but to save myself. The game was over. They just didn't know it yet. For the next few days, I was an actress. I moved through my own home like a ghost, a polite stranger to the people who had shattered my world. I made small talk. I smiled. I didn't leave any more notes on the fridge. I let them believe their plan was working perfectly, that I was the same dutiful, approval-seeking daughter. But behind the calm facade, my mind was a whirlwind of activity, a complex machine processing data and calculating the next move. The engineer in me had taken over, and my project was now a singular, all-consuming one: Operation Reclaim My Life. My first call was to my best friend, Sarah. As a human resources manager, she was an expert in navigating difficult interpersonal conflicts and understanding legal and procedural correctness. I met her at a coffee shop far from my neighborhood, needing a neutral space to lay out the ugly truth. As I recounted the overheard conversation, her expression shifted from sympathy to indignation. "Livia, this isn't just them being inconsiderate," she said, her voice firm. "This is a calculated, long-term manipulation. They are financially exploiting you. You are not a daughter helping her family, you are an unwilling landlord with parasitic tenants." Hearing her frame it in such stark, professional terms was exactly what I needed. It stripped away the messy family emotions and exposed the situation for what it was, an untenable arrangement that required a formal solution. They think my weakness is my need for their approval, I said, my voice low. But they have no idea what I'm capable of when I'm pushed. So what's the plan? Sarah asked, leaning forward. You can't just keep pretending. I need proof, I said. I need to understand the full scope of their deception. Right now, it's my word against theirs, and they will twist everything to make me look like the villain. Sarah nodded, her HR mind already at work. Documentation. It's always about documentation. Dates, times, incidents. Write everything down. But you need more than that. You need to know what their financial situation really is. That became my next objective. I started my investigation at home. With them out for the afternoon, Jessica had dragged them to the mall to help her pick out an outfit for a collaboration. I went into their rooms. I felt a pang of guilt snooping, but it vanished when I remembered their cold, calculated words. This wasn't a violation of privacy, it was a fact-finding mission. In my father's room, I found a bank statement carelessly left on his nightstand. I picked it up, my heart pounding. His pension deposits were exactly what he had told me they were, modest, but consistent. But there was another recurring deposit, a significant one, from a consulting firm. I quickly snapped a picture of the statement with my phone. He wasn't just scrolling job boards. He had been doing part-time, under-the-table consulting work for at least 2 months, earning a decent income that he had never mentioned. Next, I went into Jessica's room. Her laptop was open. A browser tab showed her social media page, full of photos of her posing in my house, in my garden, by my pool, with captions like living my best life and hard work pays off. Another tab, however, was open to her online banking portal. Curiosity got the better of me. I glanced at the screen. Not only were my parents transferring her money every month, my money, essentially, but she also had a steady stream of income from brand partnerships. It wasn't enough to buy a condo, but it was certainly enough to pay for her own phone bill, car insurance, and groceries, all of which I was currently covering. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when I checked the mail that afternoon. A letter addressed to my parents from their old bank. I knew I shouldn't open it, but I couldn't stop myself. It was a formal offer. After they had defaulted, a third-party investor had offered to buy their mortgage note from the bank at a discount. The bank was writing to inform them that if they could come up with a lump sum payment, a fraction of what they originally owed, they could reclaim their house. The deadline for the offer was in 6 months. Everything clicked. It was a perfect, horrifying picture of deceit. They weren't saving for a condo for Jessica. They were using me as a zero-expense piggy bank to save up the lump sum needed to buy back their foreclosed home. They had a secret source of income, my sister had her own money, and they had a clear financial goal and a deadline. They had lied about everything. They hadn't come to me as a last resort, they had come to me as their first and most profitable step in their financial recovery plan. My generosity wasn't a lifeline, it was the foundation of their scheme. I sat at my kitchen island, the bank letter, the photo of my dad's statement on my phone, and the memory of their cruel words swirling in my head. There was no more sadness. There was no more confusion. There was only a cold, hard certainty. I had all the data I needed. The investigation phase was complete. Now, it was time to design the solution. And I knew it wouldn't be pretty. Armed with the devastating truth, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. The emotional storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape of stark clarity. They had drawn the battle lines, and their strategy was based on emotional manipulation. My strategy would be based on logic, law, and the undeniable fact that I was the owner of the property they occupied. I had to stop thinking like a daughter and start thinking like a landlord. My first step was to seek professional legal advice. Sarah recommended a lawyer who specialized in property and tenancy laws. I booked a consultation and laid out the entire situation, presenting the evidence I had gathered, my own financial records showing I had paid for everything, a detailed log of incidents, and the information about their secret income and plan. The lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Davies, listened patiently. "This is what we call a tenancy at-will situation," she explained. "Since there's no lease agreement and they don't pay rent, they are not formal tenants. However, they have established residency, so you can't just change the locks. You have to follow the legal eviction process." She walked me through the steps. First, I had to give them a formal, written notice to quit. This document would legally inform them that their tenancy at will was being terminated and that they had a specific amount of time, in our state, it was 30 days, to vacate the premises. "This needs to be official, Livia," Ms. Davies stressed. "It should be delivered in a way you can prove they received it. Certified mail is best. This removes all emotion from the initial step. It becomes a legal transaction, not a family argument." The idea of serving my own parents with an eviction notice felt surreal, like something out of a movie. My hands trembled just thinking about it. This was the point of no return. The moment I sent that letter, the fractured remnants of our family would likely be shattered for good. I spent the weekend wrestling with the decision. A part of me, the little girl who had once craved her parents' approval, screamed in protest. It felt monstrous, cruel. I was turning my back on my family. But then, the woman I had become, the engineer, the homeowner, the person they had so thoroughly betrayed, pushed back. They had turned their backs on me first. They had left me no other choice. They had mistaken my kindness for weakness, and it was time to show them how strong I could be. On Monday morning, I called Ms. Davies and told her to draw up the papers. She drafted a formal notice to quit, addressed to Mark, Karen, and Jessica as individual occupants. It was cold, legal, and impersonal. It stated clearly that their right to occupy the property at my address would be terminated in 30 days from the date of receipt. It cited no reason, as none was legally required. The lack of emotional language was intentional. This was business. The hardest part was going to the post office. I held the 3 certified letters in my hand, their weight feeling like lead. Each one felt like a final goodbye. I imagined the moment they would receive them, the shock, the confusion, and the inevitable rage that would follow. But I also imagined the peace and quiet of my own home, the feeling of my space being mine again, the freedom from their judgment and deceit. That vision gave me the strength to push the envelopes through the slot. For the next few days, I lived on a knife's edge, waiting for the storm to break. I was polite but distant, keeping conversations short. They were oblivious, continuing their daily routines as if nothing had changed. The certified mail slips were left in our mailbox on a Thursday. My father brought the mail in. I watched from my office window as he stood in the entryway, looking at the 3 slips with a puzzled expression. He, my mother, and my sister would have to go to the post office and sign for their letters. There would be no denying they had received them. The next day, Friday, they must have picked them up, because when I came home from a site visit in the late afternoon, the house was silent. But it was a heavy, charged silence, thick with unspoken fury. All 3 of them were sitting in the living room, the opened letters on the coffee table in front of them like declarations of war. My father was the first to speak, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "What is the meaning of this, Livia?" he asked, holding up the notice. "It's an eviction notice, Dad," I said, my own voice surprisingly steady. I had rehearsed this moment in my head 100 times. "It means you have 30 days to find somewhere else to live." The dam of their composure broke. The transition from daughter to landlord was complete, and the confrontation I had dreaded was finally here. Chapter 6, the day they were forced to listen. The living room, once my place of calm and relaxation, had transformed into a courtroom, and I was on trial. My family, the 3 people I had saved from desperation, were now my accusers. Eviction, my mother, Karen, shrieked, her face contorted with a mixture of disbelief and outrage. You're evicting your own family? After everything we've done for you? We raised you. We supported you. You're throwing us out on the street. Jessica yelled, jumping to her feet. I can't believe how selfish you are. We have nowhere to go. My father, Mark, stood up slowly, his sheer physical presence meant to be intimidating. He pointed a trembling finger at me. You ungrateful child. We came here to help you, to make this empty house a home, and this is how you repay us? By treating us like criminals? I had expected the anger, the accusations, the guilt-tripping. I had prepared for it. I took a deep breath and held my ground. Let's be very clear about something, I said, my voice cutting through their hysteria. It was colder and harder than I had ever heard it before. I am not repaying you. I have been paying for you. For everything. I walked over to the dining table and set down a folder I had prepared. It was my own project file, my documentation. You want to talk about gratitude? Let's talk about facts. I pulled out the first document, a spreadsheet I had created. For the last 5 months, I have paid 100% of the mortgage, the property taxes, the insurance, the electricity, the water, the gas, the internet, and the food for 4 adults. The total comes to just over $28,000. I let that number hang in the air. Jessica's jaw dropped. My mother stared at the paper as if it were written in a foreign language. You call me a freeloader, I continued, my gaze locking with my mother's. I overheard you on the patio. You said I was pathetic and that you were doing me a favor by being here. You said my weakness was my need for your approval. You were right about one thing. I did want your approval. But I don't need it anymore. I then turned to my father. I took out my phone and showed him the picture of his bank statement. You told me you couldn't find work. But you've been doing consulting jobs for 2 months, earning almost $4,000 that you never mentioned. Where is that money, Dad? He paled, his blustering anger deflating instantly. He had no answer. Finally, I looked at Jessica. And you. You cried about having no money, yet you have brand deals and my parents have been sending. The 30 days that followed were the longest and most excruciating of my life. The house was no longer a home, it was a Cold War zone. The atmosphere was thick with resentment and unspoken hostility. They avoided me, speaking to me only when absolutely necessary, in clipped, monosyllabic sentences. They moved around the house like bitter ghosts, their presence a constant, oppressive weight. They made a few pathetic attempts to change my mind. My mother tried tears, leaving old family photo albums open on the coffee table and telling me stories about when I was a sweet little girl. My father tried intimidation, making loud, pointed phone calls to relatives, telling them a horribly twisted version of the story where I was a cold-hearted monster throwing her elderly parents out for no reason. Jessica tried a social media smear campaign, posting vague, passive-aggressive memes about fake family and snakes in the grass. None of it worked. My heart had been hardened by their deceit, and my resolve was made of steel. I ignored the emotional appeals and the digital drama. I communicated with them primarily through text messages, creating a written record of every interaction. When they asked for an extension, I texted back a single sentence, the deadline of date is firm, as stated in the legal notice. I spent as much time out of the house as I could, working late at the office, going to the gym, and having long dinners with Sarah, who was my rock through it all. When I was home, I stayed in my room with the door locked. The peace I had envisioned felt impossibly far away. As the deadline approached, the signs of their impending departure began to appear. Boxes were packed, grudgingly. A moving truck was scheduled. They had found a small apartment to rent across town, no doubt using the money they had secretly saved while living under my roof. They had the means to land on their feet all along, they just hadn't wanted to use them. The final day was bleak and overcast, matching the mood inside the house. I stayed in my office, listening to the sounds of their retreat, the scrape of boxes on the floor, the heavy tread of footsteps, the slam of the moving truck's ramp. Around 3 p.m., my mother knocked softly on my office door. "We're leaving now," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. I opened the door. She, my father, and Jessica were standing in the hallway with their purses and jackets. They wouldn't look me in the eye. There were no dramatic goodbyes, no final pleas, no apologies. The fight had gone out of them, leaving behind only sullen, wounded pride. "Here are the keys you had," I said, holding out my hand. My father snatched them from my palm without a word. They turned and walked out the front door, closing it quietly behind them. I watched through the window as the moving truck pulled away from the curb, and then they were gone. The silence they left behind was absolute. It was so profound it felt like a physical presence, pressing in on me. For the first hour, it was unnerving. The house felt huge and empty, haunted by the ghosts of the last 5 months. I walked through the rooms they had occupied. They had left them clean, surprisingly, but they felt tainted. I spent the entire weekend purging my home of their presence. I deep cleaned every room. I moved the furniture back to its original position. I changed the Wi-Fi password. I bought new sheets for the guest beds. I smudged the whole house with sage, an act that felt both silly and deeply necessary. I was not just cleaning my house, I was performing an exorcism, reclaiming my space inch by inch. As the sun set on Sunday evening, I sat on my sofa, in the exact spot my father had claimed for months. The house was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet. It wasn't the heavy, charged silence of a war zone. It was a peaceful, gentle silence. It was the sound of solitude. The weeks that followed were a journey of healing. I received angry texts from extended family members who had heard my parents' version of the story. I calmly replied to each one with a simple, "There is far more to the situation than you know, and I'm not going to discuss my private family matters." Most of them never texted again. I learned to revel in the small joys of living alone again, walking around my own house in peace, cooking what I wanted to eat, leaving a book on the coffee table and finding it in the same spot the next day. The pain of my family's betrayal didn't disappear overnight. It lingered like a phantom limb, a dull ache that surfaced at unexpected moments. But with each passing day, it lessened. I had lost a family, but I had gained myself back. I realized that my parents were right about one thing: my house had been missing something. But it wasn't them. It was me. It was missing my joy, my peace, my sense of security. The silence I once feared was now my most cherished companion. The solitude was not a sign of a pathetic life, it was the foundation of a stronger self, a self who had learned the hardest lesson of all: sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to walk away from the people who refuse to love you back.